The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. What if I told you that a narcissist's silence after hurting you is not truly silence, but a message, a psychological weapon, a quiet declaration that says, "You no longer exist unless I allow you to." And the most painful part? You begin to believe it. In today's video, we're going to decode the narcissist's silent treatment through the lens of Carl Jung, a man who believed that every act of cruelty, every manipulation, every withdrawal stems from a desperate attempt to avoid their own shadow, the darkest, most hidden parts of themselves. Because make no mistake, when a narcissist goes silent after hurting you, they're not avoiding you. They're avoiding the part of themselves they fear to confront. From Jung's concepts of the shadow and the persona to the narcissist's need for control and fear of exposure, we'll explore how they turn absence into power and why your craving for closure becomes the very trap that keeps you stuck in their web. Stay with us until the end of the video, because what you're about to hear won't just help you understand them. It may help you finally reclaim yourself from the grip of those who once made you question your own worth. Let's begin. The shadow is everything about ourselves that we do not want to be and yet still are. Carl Jung. When a narcissist hurts you and then suddenly disappears into silence, it is not a coincidence. And it's certainly not a spontaneous reaction caused by fatigue or mood swings. It's a strategy, a calculated form of psychological manipulation disguised as silence. According to Carl Jung, the shadow represents the repressed, unconscious aspects of the self, the darker traits, the buried shame, and the unhealed wounds that we're too afraid to face. The narcissist lives in complete disconnection from their shadow. They construct a persona, a flawless, charming, superior mask to avoid confronting their inner sense of inadequacy. But here's the paradox. Anyone who unconsciously denies their shadow will inevitably project it onto others. And you, the one who begins to see through the mask, become the threat. When you question them, when you express pain, when you ask for clarity, you crack the very illusion they use to protect themselves. And instead of taking responsibility or facing consequences, they retreat. But this withdrawal is not about taking space or needing time to think, as you may still be hoping. It's a punishment, a silent denial of your existence. And this is where psychology steps in, because the human brain is wired to seek connection and closure. When a close and intimate relationship is abruptly cut off, the confusion doesn't just hurt, it becomes an identity crisis. You're not just in pain, you begin to doubt yourself. You start thinking, was I too sensitive? Did I do something wrong? Maybe I shouldn't have spoken up. And while you spiral through thousands of unanswered questions, they do absolutely nothing and still retain all the power. Carl Jung warned us that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And the silence of the narcissist, if you don't clearly see it for what it is, becomes a recurring psychic trap where you endlessly search for answers from someone who never intended to give them. You see, that silence isn't a pause. It's an intentional void, a space where you're left alone with unanswered questions while they stand at a distance watching to see if you'll collapse. In the previous section, we talked about how they don't need to scream to control you, they just need to disappear. And now, we enter a deeper layer of that psychological game. Silence is no longer just a tool for dominance. It becomes a force that slowly leads you to destroy yourself. Why is that? Because human beings have a natural tendency to interpret confusion as their own fault. When someone you trust disappears after hurting you, your instinct isn't always anger. It's to find reasons to forgive them and blame yourself. You start to think, maybe I overreacted. Maybe I was just too sensitive. What did I do to deserve that kind of treatment? And just like that, the loop of self-blame begins. Here's the cruel part. The narcissist knows this. They use their disappearance as a calculated move to make you feel off balance, uncertain, and easier to control. No accusations, no raised voices, just the perfectly timed absence. And you begin to unravel, question your worth, and wait in desperation for their return. But behind all that coldness, there is no strength, only avoidance. Avoiding responsibility, avoiding guilt, avoiding the truth that they caused harm but lacked the courage to face it. Carl Jung believed that no one can truly grow if they continue living in denial of themselves. But narcissists are different. They have no desire for growth. They only crave control, even if that control comes through silence. And the most tragic part is this: you, the one seeking answers, end up doing all the emotional labor in the relationship. You carry the pain, the confusion, the effort to fix what's broken. And then they vanish. They avoid accountability. And they know you'll blame yourself for everything. That's how silence, something that seems so passive, becomes a deliberate form of punishment. And here lies the painful paradox that many people don't recognize. The more you try to re-establish connection with a narcissist after they've gone silent, the more you extend their power over your mind. In the previous section, we saw that silence is not an ending, it's a refined method of control, a way to confuse you, disorient you, and make you turn against yourself. But do you know what makes that strategy fail? It's when you stop reacting, when you no longer send that follow-up message, when you stop trying to explain yourself, when you refuse to chase the why behind their silence. That's when the power dynamic begins to shift. You see, for a narcissist, your reaction is fuel. Your emotions are the primary source of their feeling that I still have power, I still matter. When you get angry, they feel they've won. When you beg, they feel worshipped. When you're in pain, they feel important. Any emotion you throw, whether love or rage, keeps them at the center of your emotional world. Carl Jung once said, "You cannot be yourself so long as you let others define your worth." And nowhere is that truth more relevant than here. When you stop reacting, something powerful happens. They no longer have anything to hold on to. No more anger to manipulate. No more explanations to twist. No more person to hurt without fearing the silence of their own emptiness. The more consciously and deliberately silent you become, the more you reclaim authority over your mind. But remember, your silence is not like theirs. Their silence is punishment. Your silence is liberation. A silence rooted in clarity, in the understanding that I don't need to beg for validation from someone emotionally unequipped to love. And that, right there, is the first step toward healing. When you stop searching for answers from someone who was never interested in giving them, you no longer play their emotional chess game. You fold the board, you rise, and you walk away in silence, but with undeniable strength. You see, now silence is no longer powerlessness. When you stop reacting, you are no longer the one being manipulated. You become the one who consciously steps away from a twisted game of power. And it is precisely that silence, born from awareness and inner strength, that becomes the loudest message you will ever send. No harsh words, no final dramatic goodbye, no angry monologue exposing the narcissist, just your absence. And in that absence, they're forced to confront the one thing they fear the most, their own insignificance. You're no longer reacting. You're no longer pleading. You no longer exist within the universe they once controlled. And for a narcissist, someone who survives on being seen, desired, mirrored through others' emotions, your disappearance is a kind of ego death. Carl Jung once said, "The ego always wants to be at the center, but true growth comes when we detach from the ego and move toward wholeness." So when you go silent, not to punish, but to protect your own wholeness, you are taking your first true steps out of that cycle of pain. You're no longer chasing explanations from someone who's mastered the art of evasion. You become the one who says, "I deserve more than this, and I don't need your voice to validate that truth." And that right there is when the power dynamic collapses, not through screaming, arguing, or tears, but through calm, conscious, sovereign silence. You're no longer trying to make them see your worth, because you've finally seen it for yourself. In the end, you're faced with a truth that is neither comfortable nor easy, but deeply liberating. You will never get the apology you deserve. You will never hear the words, "I was wrong." And you cannot make someone who never truly saw you suddenly learn how to love you the way you needed. So the closure you need won't come from them. It has to come from within you. You don't need an explanation from someone who chose silence as a weapon of control. What you need is a period one that you place to free yourself from the emotional loop that's been draining your soul. Carl Jung believed that true maturity only begins when a person dares to confront their own shadow. But narcissists don't do that. They project their shadow onto others, then walk away as if they're blameless. So stop carrying the emotional burden for them. Stop trying to make peace with someone who punishes with silence. You were not born to live in a waiting room of someone who never truly intended to stay. Their disappearance is not your ending, it's your beginning. No more confusion. No more proving. No more needing to be seen in order to feel worthy. And if there's one thing you take away from this video, let it be this. Their silence never defined your worth. But your silence can become the boldest declaration of self-respect you've ever made.